In this video, I will compare the Japanese feudal system to the European feudal system in their respective Middle Ages. I will elaborate on the different periods within the Japanese Middle Ages and go into depth about the more important ones. When I mention Japan, what comes to your mind? Technology, cars, industry, samurai, Studio Ghibli, and manga is what comes to my mind. But Japan is also a country drenched in historical and cultural importance and significance. To clarify, the reason why medieval Japan is used as a term is not because it was a dark period between two greater ones, as we do in Europe, but because its time frame shares a few similarities with the European one, both in social class system and technological and cultural advancement. The Japanese Middle Ages was a period that lasted from 1185 to 1603. This time span is often broken up to four different periods: the Kamakura, the Kenmu Restoration, the Muromachi, and the Asuchi Moyoma periods. Compared to the European Middle Ages, that lasted from the 5th century upwards to the 15th. The European Middle Ages can be divided into three parts: the Early Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, and the Late Middle Ages. While there are four different periods within the Japanese Middle Age, I will only cover the most relevant ones to my subject, being the Kamakura period and the Kenmu Restoration. Kamakura, 1185 to 1333. The Kamakura period is a period of Japanese history that marks the governance by the Kamakura shogunate. Officially established in 1192 in the city of Kamakura by the first ever shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo. The period itself is known for the emergence of the samurai, the warrior caste, and the establishment of feudalism in Japan. The Kenmu Restoration, 1333 to 1336. The Kenmu Restoration was a short-lasting effort by the Japanese imperials to take back the power and make themselves the real rulers of Japan. This worked for a short time, about 3 years, but after a couple of major political mistakes by the imperial family, it was toppled and replaced by the Ashikaga shogunate. Now I'm going to explain the Japanese feudal system. At the top, the emperor. The emperor was looked up to by all his people as the supreme ruler of the nation, but had little real political power and was seen as more of a puppet figure, often to be controlled by both shoguns, daimyos, and court ministers. After him, we have the shogun. The shogun, similar to the European duke and lord, was probably the most important figure in the Japanese society. He was seen as second in line, but did most of the work. He was a military leader, so he was in charge of many of the decisions to do with military, armies, battles, and campaigns. The third one down is the daimyo. The daimyo was a very powerful figure who served the shogun. His job was to control a large area of land for the shogun. He was also in charge of their samurai, whom he paid to work and protect him and his people. The samurai. The famous samurai were Japanese warriors, similar to the European knight. They served and protected their daimyo with respect. They also fought for their people and protected them too, bringing justice and order to the community. They followed a code of conduct called Bushido, meaning the way of the warrior, which told them how to live their lives. The peasants. Peasants were farmers and fishermen. They were actually considered a higher class in medieval Japan than in medieval Europe, because the Japanese believed that since the peasants produced the food, which was dependent on by all classes, therefore they worked harder and earned more respect. And now, all the way at the bottom, we have the artisans and craftsmen. The artisans and craftsmen were workers skilled in a particular trade. These included sword making, dressmaking, wood block printing, and boat building. Now, let's compare the medieval Japanese feudal system to the European feudal system, and find out what the differences and similarities are between the two class systems. Firstly, the Japanese system did not include any major religious figure or establishment, whereas the European one had the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church as one of the head figures. Even though the feudal era of Japan saw the rise and flourishment of many religions, for instance Buddhism and Shintoism, they did not enjoy any real secular power unlike their European counterparts in Rome. Secondly, the leader of Japan, the emperor, did not hold any real secular power unlike their western cousins, the emperors and kings of Europe, that ruled a lot more direct and with more control over day-to-day affairs, such as a more solidified position in the military. For example, Charlemagne, king of the Franks, fought in the front lines and commanded his troops. Thirdly, the shoguns of Japan were a very powerful group. They were the ones that had all the real power in most aspects of Japanese society, contrary to their European equivalents, the dukes, barons and lords. Although they too were powerful figures with control over vast swathes of land and people, they did not have any of the same jurisdiction over civilian and governmental affairs as the shoguns of Japan. We also see another difference between the feudal systems when we look at one of the lowest classes, the peasants. In Europe, this group of people were not only the lowest of the low, but they were often no different than slaves or serfs. But in Japan, records show that farmers were treated respectfully by the higher classes because they produced the food that all classes relied on. Conclusion. To conclude, the Japanese and European feudal systems are both made to control and subdue the population, and to make sure that everyone knew their place and role in society. Even though there are many differences and similarities, their purpose remains the same.